feminism, well, that there is no historical, there's no recorded instances of a matriarchy, in history. So there's never been a female-based society or civilization. Sort of a contradiction in terms. Civilization is a male creation. Civilization is based on patriarchy. So this is why MGTOW is just as absurd as feminism. It's interesting because the technology and the comforts and whatnot that the men that call themselves MGTOW that they enjoy is a result of patriarchy, not MGTOW. Okay, the patriarchy starts in the nuclear family. This is the original organization. This is the original business. Okay, the family unit. And this is where we build from there to civilization. Civilizations are based on patriarchy, male leadership, and so on. Of course, in ancient times, it wasn't merely a nuclear family, it was an extended family. But that order extended throughout the entire network of kin, this male leadership. And this is all a part of sedentism. When we became sedentary, things became more hierarchical. And you had a division of labor and so on and so forth. These are the rudiments of civilization. So when you're talking about MGTOW and feminism and you're talking about destroying the family and men doing whatever they want to do and women doing whatever they want to do, you're talking about anarchy, you're talking about chaos, you're talking about savagery. So you have MGTOW who are really promoting the same thing that feminism is promoting in terms of disarray and destruction. And just like feminism leads to female homosexuality, MGTOW, with its inordinate focus on male bonding, will lead to male homosexuality. So, feminism and the MGTOW philosophy are perversions. Essentially, I think they have very, very limited value in terms of feminism. It has very limited value in terms of guaranteeing some very basic rights to women, so that they are not just totally abused and just otherwise mistreated. But there's no need for feminism is its own ideology. There's no need for that. Civilization got on just fine for thousands of years without feminism, and I think that a lot of what we've been taught is abuse or mistreatment of women is actually not. But this video is not really about that. Feminism is essentially just very destructive and unwarranted. And what it seeks to promote is unnatural. But again, I'm not going to go into really analyzing feminism. This is more about comparing MGTOW and feminism, with really more of an emphasis on MGTOW. But MGTOW has its value limited in terms of its capacity, potential to starve the state of the funds that it is extorting from men. It has short-term value as a method of resistance to send a message, but you have people like Stardust and Barbarossa who are going so far as to make this sort of a new and legitimate paradigm in its own right, where you talk about one of the main tenets, one of the main pillars of it being the creation of an artificial womb, so that women become superfluous, at least in terms of reproduction. Okay. And they talk about men overriding their biology essentially through sheer will, to where they sort of no longer have a need for women in terms of physical intimacy, for sex. They sort of turn off their biology again, or override it, which is it's twisted and it's perverse and it's absurd. It's the same type of silly thinking that feminists engage in. Where they, you had the one, who was it that stated that women need men like a fish needs a bicycle. It's thinking that issues from that sort of matrix. It's entirely unrealistic and a waste of time and frankly destructive.
Okay, in this section, you notice that the author rambles quite a bit. But the first thing we want to get out of the way is the definition of what a civilization actually is. A civilization is a very, very highly hierarchical and complex society. And they're very rare and they're very, very recent in human history. When he talks about a female dominated society or a female-led society, and he says that there is no recorded history of a female-led civilization, and that's probably true because for most of human history, civilizations did not exist. So we're talking about 2 million years, 2.5 million years of not recorded, but human history. And then 200,000 years when Homo sapiens first appeared. How did we survive for so long without a civilization? The fact is that we did. And there are many, many, many societies, thousands upon thousands of societies that existed before the first civilization ever arose. And still, concurrently with civilizations, there were thousands of societies that surrounded them. Patriarchy is a very recent, comparatively very recent phenomenon. If you're talking about the definition of what a patriarchy actually is. The first patriarchy started with the Etruscans and the Greeks. And we're talking about maybe 500 BC, which is very, very recent if we're talking about archaeological terms. Most civilizations were what we would call trilineal. In other words, they were not quite egalitarian, but the thing is, male and female both contributed to the civilization. It was not a patriarchy. You can tell that by the religious symbols that were shown in the civilizations, Mesopotamia, and especially the Egyptian civilization, which children and family names were recorded through the female line. They're trilineal. Trilineal still exist in Africa. Trilineal civilizations existed in South America. The Mayan culture was trilineal. It was not a patriarchy. For most of human history, the mother goddess ruled because the role of the father wasn't known. The role of the father wasn't known until animal husbandry, and that's why you call it animal husbandry, is because it's controlling the male sperm, didn't exist until maybe 15,000 years ago. So human beings had no concept of father. The only concept they had was of mother. That's how come for the most of human history, the religious symbols was of what? The female. Very good book, The Origins and Evolutions of Religion by Albert Churchward, details that about your first religious symbols were female. And the majority of your religious symbols were female right up until the time of the late dynasty in Egypt. So the brother needs to go back and do his homework. That leads me to the next item when he talks about the family unit or the nuclear family, which is also a very recent phenomenon. Now, it's true marriage or the linking of a man and a woman go back to what he calls sedentism. Well, when you have property, because before that you didn't have property, that you need to have a way of identifying that property and associating those possessions with a unit, which is a family unit, husband and wife. But that is maybe 12,000 years ago, maybe even 15 if we want to be generous. So if the role of the father was unknown and a father could not be linked to a child, then you cannot have a family unit. So before that, there was no family unit. There were clans. There were clans of brothers and sisters and the extended family, and the children belonged to the clan. And they didn't belong necessarily to one mother, because a child could nurse for more than one female because they were all basically related. The idea of a family is very recent, and the nuclear family is a very recent phenomenon. The idea of a nuclear family only goes back about 500 years. The definition of the modern nuclear family is the non-kinship based relationship, and that can be traced back to Northern Europe and about maybe the 15th century. So, like I say, brother needs to do some of his homework. Now, here's something we're going to deal with. That kind of made me laugh a little bit, but it's very serious and it's very untrue. What the brother says is that feminism and MGTOW are going to lead to homosexuality. Seriously? His blessed patriarchy, which the major manifestation of it was Rome and Greece, promoted homosexuality. They were the biggest promoters of homosexuality. It was encouraged. It was part of the society. Now, where does MGTOW, which has never promoted homosexuality, homosexuals have their own group. If MGTOWs wanted to be homosexuals, they would just be homosexuals. They wouldn't have to worry about women. But let's get that out of the way. Now, feminism, from my estimation, has very little bearing on whether they're homosexual or not. I know feminism comes out of the 60s, especially modern feminism comes out of the 60s, and they promote sexual freedom. So whether they're homosexual, lesbianism, or what they call free sex, that's what feminism promotes. That's what they do. Now, one thing he did mention in his video that I agree with, MGTOW is a method of resistance. That is something that we can't agree on. It is sometimes a protest movement against the oppression of the society against men. I wholeheartedly agree with that. That's one thing I have to give the brother kudos for saying that I agree with. Okay. MGTOW is a reaction to the modern feminized society that we exist in. So kudos to you for that one, brother. The idea of the artificial womb. Now, MGTOW promotes freedom, and freedom from the shackles of the historical society that doesn't fit the model anymore, that doesn't work for men anymore. So the artificial womb is one of those things to where men that want to have the biological need to reproduce, but don't want to be handcuffed by the state. Now, if you have sex with a woman and you reproduce, one, you're giving up control of that to the woman, and secondly, you're giving up control of your resources to the woman by actually doing that. So the artificial womb to MGTOWs is a good idea from them. But the idea of the artificial womb is something that's going to happen anyway. When you look at hacking the body and hacking the genes, and the idea of clones is a very, very old idea, well before MGTOW. It's not a silly idea. It's an idea that is coming. It's probably going to come anyway, to where very few people, I would say 100 years from now, will be reproduced by a woman's womb. That's going to happen. You know, that is recorded in literature for the last, I would say, 60, 70 years. That's not a new idea. You can go back to Aldous Huxley's A Brave New World back in the 40s. They had this idea. That's not new. The idea of an artificial womb came out of the patriarchy. It's not a MGTOW idea. Now we're going to deal with the idea and the myth about MGTOW and sex. This is a main one. MGTOW does not promote or necessarily promote celibacy. That is always an option. That is always an option for the people that actually want to do it. What MGTOW does promote is control over your sexuality. To put it plainly, most men get in trouble because of their dick. You look at the men in prison, you look at the men selling drugs, most men get in trouble because their dick is overruling their will, or the little head is controlling the big head. You're doing stupid shit behind women. So control of your sexuality is not a new idea. The Bible that you read, that the author reads and promotes, talks about controlling what? Sexuality. That's why premarital sex in the Old Testament, or the Old Testament God, is illegal. What is that? Controlling your sex drive. Fornication. Adultery. All that stuff is doing what? Controlling your sex drive. And that's what MGTOW promotes, because your dick will get you in trouble. We're not saying don't have it. We're not saying don't have women for sex. What we're saying is, if you're going to use it responsibly. We promote responsible sex in MGTOW. So let's get that straight. Only the people, the older guys, the level 4s that have the ability and have the wisdom and have the age to actually voluntarily control their sex drive, they are the only ones we advocate that even actually do that. We don't even advocate that young men even try it, because it's very difficult. When you have high testosterone and you're a young man and you don't have the wisdom or the ability to control it, to actually do it, what we're saying is, if you're going to do it responsibly. Another falsehood is about feminism promotes celibacy. Come on, dude, it's the exact opposite. What are the fucking slut walks out there for? Feminism promotes riding the cock carousel, right? Screw all the bad boys, screw all the alpha males that you can find to the best of your ability, and then when you settle down and you got that all out of your system and you get 30, 35, your career is going, guess what? Then you want to find your beta male, your beta provider, right? That's what feminism promotes, especially modern feminism. That's what they promote. They are the opposite. It's the old patriarchal women that talk about controlling your sex drive. Feminism has never promoted celibacy, ever, 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 ever. They've always promoted sexual freedom. They're the ones that talk about not shaming sluts. That's the first things out of their mouths. Women have the sexual choice. That's what they want. They want freedom. They want to be able to get drunk, screw whoever guy that they want, and not feel responsible. They're not for responsible sex. They're the exact opposite. You hear me? Opposite of what MGTOW promotes. Get it right.